Inside the Room: How the Department of Justice Monitors Congress. Picture this. You are an elected member of Congress, sworn to uphold the Constitution, tasked with oversight of the executive branch. You walk into a secure facility operated by the very agency you are supposed to be investigating. You log into a computer with credentials that have been uniquely assigned to you, and with every keystroke, every search term you enter, every document you open, the agency you are scrutinizing is watching. They are recording your queries. They are tracking which files draw your attention. They are building a profile of your investigation in real time. And when the Attorney General appears before your committee to answer questions, she arrives with printouts showing exactly what you have been looking at. This is not a hypothetical scenario from a political thriller. This is the reality facing members of the United States Congress as they attempt to investigate one of the most significant criminal conspiracies in modern American history. The Jeffrey Epstein case, with its web of powerful enablers, political connections, and institutional failures, represents a test of whether the American justice system can hold the elite accountable. But as lawmakers dig deeper, they are discovering that the obstacles to truth are not just buried in classified files or protected by legal privileges. The obstacles are being actively constructed by the Department of Justice itself in ways that fundamentally undermine the separation of powers and the constitutional system of checks and balances. What we are witnessing is nothing less than the executive branch conducting surveillance on the legislative branch during an active oversight investigation. This is not about national security. This is not about protecting sensitive intelligence methods. This is about an administration monitoring the people who are supposed to be monitoring them. And the implications extend far beyond the Epstein case. If the Department of Justice can track congressional investigators with impunity, if they can log searches and weaponize that information against elected representatives, then the entire framework of accountability in American government is at risk. The story begins with a law. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was passed with the explicit purpose of bringing sunlight to one of the darkest episodes in the history of American law enforcement. For years, Jeffrey Epstein operated a sex trafficking network that ensnared underage girls, facilitated abuse by wealthy and powerful men, and continued despite repeated warnings to authorities. When Epstein was finally arrested in 2019, there was hope that the full scope of his crimes and the identities of his accomplices would finally be exposed. But Epstein died in federal custody under circumstances that remain disputed. His associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, was convicted and sentenced to prison. And then, for the most part, the case went quiet. The survivors did not go quiet. They demanded answers. They demanded justice. They demanded to know who else was involved, who else knew, who else facilitated or covered up these crimes. Their voices eventually reached Congress, and lawmakers from both parties began pushing for transparency. The result was legislation requiring the release of government files related to the Epstein investigation. The law was clear. Documents should be released. Redactions should be limited to protecting victim identities. The American people had a right to know what their government knew about this criminal enterprise and when they knew it. But between the letter of the law and its implementation lies a vast terrain where bureaucracies can maneuver, delay, and obstruct. And that is exactly what has happened. When files were finally released, survivors and advocates were horrified to discover that victim names had been left unredacted in many cases, exposing them to harassment and re-traumatization. Meanwhile, the names of alleged perpetrators and powerful associates were carefully blacked out. The pattern was unmistakable. Protect the powerful, expose the vulnerable. This was not what the law required. This was not what transparency looks like. This was selective disclosure designed to create the appearance of openness while ensuring that the most damaging information remained hidden. Members of Congress were not satisfied with the public release. They demanded access to the unredacted files. After all, they have oversight authority over the Department of Justice. They have security clearances. They have a constitutional duty to ensure that executive agencies are functioning properly and lawfully. The Department of Justice eventually agreed to make unredacted files available for congressional review, but the process they established raises serious questions about whether they ever intended to allow genuine oversight or whether the entire exercise was designed to create the illusion of cooperation while actually hindering the investigation. Here's how it works. The Department of Justice has set up 4 computers in a small, secure room located in a separate building from the main Capitol complex. Members of Congress must travel to this DOJ facility. They cannot bring phones or recording devices. They are given time slots, typically 30 minutes to 1 hour, to review materials. When they arrive, they log in with unique credentials assigned specifically to them. And here is the critical detail that has only recently come to light. Those unique logins allow the Department of Justice to track every action taken by each member of Congress, every search term entered, every document opened, every file reviewed. The agency being investigated knows exactly what the investigators are looking at. Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi serves on the House Oversight Committee and has personally gone through this process. In a recent interview, he described the mounting realization that his activities were being monitored. He noted that photographers observed Attorney General Pam Bondi arriving at a congressional hearing with documents that appeared to contain records of searches conducted by members of the Judiciary Committee. Think about that for a moment. The Attorney General, preparing to face questions from Congress about the Epstein files, had access to intelligence about what those questioners had been researching. She knew which documents they had opened, which names they had searched for, which aspects of the case had drawn their attention. This gives her an enormous advantage. She can prepare specific defenses for specific lines of inquiry. She can anticipate weak points in their knowledge. She can craft responses that exploit gaps in what they have been able to review. This is not how oversight is supposed to function. The whole point of congressional investigation is that it operates independently of the agency, under scrutiny. Investigators need to be able to follow leads without the subject of the investigation knowing where they are looking. That is basic investigative practice. If a detective were investigating a suspect and the suspect had access to the detective's case file, watching in real time which witnesses were being interviewed and which evidence was being examined, we would immediately recognize that as a fatal compromise of the investigation. Yet that is precisely what is happening here. Except the stakes are higher because this involves the fundamental balance of power in our constitutional system. The surveillance is only part of the story. Congressman Krishnamoorthi also described a series of restrictions that make it nearly impossible to conduct effective oversight even if lawmakers were not being monitored. He brought a legal pad and a binder of previously redacted emails to the secure room. His plan was straightforward. Look at the unredacted versions and fill in the blanks to understand what had been hidden. But DOJ personnel told him he could not write on the printed emails. Notes had to be taken separately, so he switched to sticky notes, thinking he could at least mark important passages. The next day, he was informed that sticky notes were no longer allowed. He then began writing on small notepads and tearing out pages to keep with corresponding documents in his binder. That, too, was prohibited. He was told all notes must remain in a single notepad, making it virtually impossible to organize information or connect patterns across multiple documents. These are not security protocols. These are obstruction tactics disguised as procedure. And according to the congressman, the DOJ staff implementing these rules were polite and professional, but clearly acting under orders from above. The message was unmistakable. You can look at the files, but we are going to make it as difficult as possible for you to understand them, organize them, or use them effectively. This is compliance with the letter of the law while violating its spirit. The technical limitations are equally revealing. The database containing the files does not have a functioning search capability. If a lawmaker wants to find references to a specific individual, they can enter that name, and the system will return some results. But once a document is opened, there is no way to search within it to find where the name appears. Imagine trying to review a 100-page document looking for a single reference without a search function. Now imagine trying to do that across millions of pages within strictly limited time windows. It is an impossible task, and it appears to be designed that way. When asked about specific types of documents, particularly FBI 302 forms, which are witness interview reports, Congressman Krishnamoorthi reported that these were either completely redacted or missing entirely. Even court filings from Florida and New York that should be part of the public record remained redacted in the supposedly unredacted database. The Department of Justice claims these documents came to them already redacted, but that explanation does not hold up to scrutiny. The DOJ has the authority to obtain complete court records. They have the authority to compile comprehensive files. The Epstein Files Transparency Act requires them to do exactly that, with redactions limited to protecting victim identities. Yet what lawmakers are finding is the opposite. Victims are exposed. Alleged perpetrators are protected. Investigators, FBI agents, and DOJ personnel are redacted, even though the law does not require that. And congressional overseers trying to understand what happened are blocked, tracked, and hindered at every turn. This systematic obstruction occurred against the backdrop of a congressional hearing that became a flashpoint for public anger across the political spectrum. Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared before the House Judiciary Committee to answer questions about the Epstein files and other matters. The hearing was attended by survivors of Epstein and Maxwell's crimes. These women, who had shown extraordinary courage in coming forward, in telling their stories, in fighting for justice despite years of being dismissed and disbelieved, were present in the gallery. At one point during the proceedings, they stood and raised their hands, seeking acknowledgement from the nation's chief law enforcement officer. Attorney General Bondi looked away. She did not make eye contact. She did not acknowledge them. A photograph captured the moment, and it has since circulated widely across social media and news outlets. The image is stark. Survivors standing with hands raised, the Attorney General's gaze directed elsewhere. That photograph has become a symbol of everything that is wrong with how this case has been handled. It shows who has courage and who does not. It shows who seeks truth and who evades it. The reaction has been remarkably bipartisan. Republican commentators, influencers, and activists who typically support the administration expressed shock and disappointment. One prominent voice wrote that Bondi's refusal to even look at the survivors was insane and shameful. Another stated that her demeanor was disgraceful and that there is no excuse for deflecting legitimate questions about why no one in the Epstein files has been indicted. Even staunch Republican supporters acknowledged that the handling of the files has degraded American trust in institutions and leaders. This is significant because it demonstrates that the failure here is not a partisan perception. It is a shared reality recognized across ideological lines. Democratic lawmakers were equally scathing. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett delivered a searing rebuke at the end of the hearing, addressing the survivors directly. She thanked them for having more courage and moral clarity in their pinky fingers than the entire Department of Justice. She described the United States as the laughing stock of the world due to failed leadership within the DOJ. She praised Republican Congressman Thomas Massie for being the only person on his side with the backbone to stand up to corruption. This kind of cross-party acknowledgement is rare in the current political environment, and it underscores just how badly the hearing went. Congresswoman Crockett did not limit her criticism to the Epstein files. She raised a series of other allegations, including DOJ obstruction of investigations into rogue agents who allegedly murdered American citizens, seizure of voter data from Fulton County in what she characterized as an attempt to steal the 2026 midterm elections, federal agents on tape accepting bribes with investigations subsequently killed, and a constitutionally questionable payment to the president. Her conclusion was damning. She stated that Bondi would be remembered as one of the worst attorney generals in history, someone who prioritized obstruction over justice, corruption over law, and loyalty to the president over loyalty to the Constitution. Perhaps the most bizarre moment of the hearing came when Attorney General Bondi began citing stock market performance in response to questions about the criminal investigation. She touted the Dow Jones crossing 50,000, the S&P nearing 7,000, and NASDAQ records being broken. She insisted that Americans' retirement accounts were booming and that this was what should be discussed. Lawmakers appeared genuinely confused. One asked what the stock market had to do with anything. The Attorney General insisted it was relevant, that the economic achievements of the administration were being ignored. But stock market performance falls under the purview of the Treasury Department and economic policymakers, not the Department of Justice. The Attorney General's job is to enforce the law and pursue justice. Her decision to deflect to economic talking points when asked about a criminal investigation revealed either a fundamental misunderstanding of her role or a calculated attempt to avoid accountability. New documents continue to emerge that raise additional questions. One file shows what appears to be Dr. Mehmet Oz, now serving in the Trump administration, extending an invitation to Jeffrey Epstein for a Valentine's Day celebration in February 2016. This was years after Epstein's initial conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. The document prompts obvious questions. Why was a future government official maintaining social ties with a registered sex offender? What was the nature of their relationship? Were there other interactions? These questions deserve answers, but the current DOJ seems uninterested in pursuing them. The path forward depends on whether Congress can overcome the obstacles being placed in their way. Congressman Krishnamoorthi made clear that the Oversight Committee is not relying solely on the Department of Justice. They have issued subpoenas to financial institutions. They are preparing to depose Leslie Wexner, the billionaire businessman who appears throughout the Epstein files as an alleged co-conspirator. That deposition is scheduled for 1 week from today. Wexner was at the center of Epstein's operation. He gave Epstein power of attorney. He allegedly transferred valuable real estate to Epstein for nominal sums. Understanding Wexner's role is critical to understanding how Epstein built his network and operated for so long with apparent impunity. The committee is also speaking with the executors of Epstein's estate. They are seeking financial records that might reveal the flow of money, the sources of Epstein's wealth, and potential money laundering operations. The congressman was explicit about what he wants to learn from Wexner, not just the sex trafficking operation, but all of Epstein's criminal enterprises, the financial dealings, the mechanisms by which he accumulated and moved wealth, and Wexner's own potential involvement in facilitating those activities. When asked about his message to survivors, Congressman Krishnamoorthi spoke personally. He mentioned his own young daughters and his determination to ensure they never face the possibility of such exploitation. He acknowledged the many ways government has failed the survivors and pledged that he and many of his colleagues would not add to that failure. This is the kind of moral clarity that has been absent from the Department of Justice's handling of the case. The broader implications of this story extend far beyond one criminal case, however significant. What we are watching is a stress test of American democracy's immune system. The Constitution establishes 3 co-equal branches of government precisely to prevent any one branch from accumulating unchecked power. The legislative branch is given oversight authority over the executive specifically so that agencies like the Department of Justice cannot operate in the shadows, answerable to no one. But that system only works if oversight is genuine, if investigators can actually investigate without being monitored and obstructed by those they are investigating. If the current situation is allowed to stand, if the Department of Justice can track congressional searches, impose arbitrary restrictions on document review, selectively redact files to protect the powerful while exposing victims, and face no meaningful consequences, then the precedent is set. Future administrations, regardless of party, will know they can stonewall oversight with impunity. They can create the appearance of transparency while ensuring that damaging information never sees light. They can turn the tools of surveillance inward, monitoring the monitors and compromising the independence of congressional investigation. This is not a left or right issue. This is not about whether you support or oppose the current administration. This is about whether we will have a functioning system of accountability at all. Today, it is the Epstein files and a Republican administration obstructing oversight. Tomorrow, it could be a different scandal and a Democratic administration using the same tactics. The political actors may change, but the erosion of constitutional checks and balances affects everyone. Once these norms are broken, once these precedents are set, they become tools available to whoever holds power. And history teaches us that power, once acquired and unchecked, is rarely used with restraint. The survivors at the center of this story have already endured unimaginable trauma. They were victimized as children. They were disbelieved when they came forward. They watched as their abusers lived lives of luxury and influence. They saw Jeffrey Epstein receive a sweetheart plea deal that amounted to a slap on the wrist. They witnessed him continue socializing with the elite even after his conviction. When he was finally arrested again and facing serious charges, he died under suspicious circumstances in federal custody, taking his secrets with him. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted, but she was convicted largely for crimes everyone already knew about. The network that enabled them, the powerful men who participated, the institutions that looked the other way, all of that remains largely unexamined and unpunished. Now these same survivors watch as the government releases files with their names exposed while protecting perpetrators. They watch as the Attorney General refuses to even look at them during a hearing. They watch as members of Congress who are trying to help are tracked and obstructed by the very agency that should be pursuing justice. The message this sends is devastating. It tells survivors that they do not matter. It tells them that the system that failed to protect them as children will continue to fail them as adults. It tells them that power protects power, and that those who speak truth will be ignored, dismissed, or worse. But something else is happening too. The bipartisan outrage, the willingness of Republican voices to call out a Republican administration, the determination of lawmakers like Krishnamoorthi and Massey to keep pushing despite the obstacles, these are signs that the system has not completely failed. There are still people in positions of authority who understand their duty and are willing to fulfill it even when it is politically inconvenient or personally difficult. There are still journalists asking hard questions and demanding real answers. There is still a public that cares about justice and is not willing to simply move on as the White House would prefer. The question is whether that will be enough. Congressional investigations can uncover facts and expose wrongdoing, but they cannot prosecute crimes. That power rests with the Department of Justice. And if the DOJ is compromised, if it is more interested in protecting the powerful than pursuing justice, then congressional oversight alone cannot deliver accountability. It can shine a light, but light alone does not put criminals behind bars. For that, you need a justice system that functions, that applies the law equally, that does not offer immunity based on wealth or political connections. Right now, we do not have that system. We have a two-tiered system where different rules apply depending on who you are. If you are a survivor trying to seek justice, your name gets exposed and you face the possibility of harassment and intimidation. If you are an alleged perpetrator with money and influence, your name gets redacted and you face no serious scrutiny. If you are a member of Congress trying to conduct oversight, you get tracked and hindered. If you are an attorney general refusing to answer questions, you get to deflect to stock market numbers and walk away without consequences. This cannot continue. A system this broken, this corrupted, this fundamentally unjust cannot sustain legitimacy indefinitely. The anger we are seeing from left and right, from survivors and advocates and ordinary citizens, is not just about the Epstein case. It is about a growing recognition that the game is rigged, that the powerful play by different rules, that justice is for sale to the highest bidder. And when people lose faith in the justice system, when they conclude that legal and peaceful means of accountability do not work, the alternatives are far more dangerous and destabilizing. So this moment matters. The coming days and weeks will reveal whether Congress can overcome the DOJ's obstruction and get real answers. The Wexner deposition could be illuminating. The subpoenas to financial institutions might reveal money trails that expose the network. Additional documents might emerge that are too damning to ignore. Or this could all fizzle out, buried under bureaucratic delays and procedural obstacles until public attention moves on to the next crisis. The survivors will still be here either way. Their trauma does not fade because the news cycle shifts. Their demand for justice does not disappear because it becomes politically inconvenient. And the question of whether America's legal system can hold the elite accountable will remain unanswered and corrosive, eating away at whatever remains of public trust in institutions. In that hearing room, when those survivors stood with hands raised and the Attorney General looked away, we saw in miniature the entire problem. The powerful refusing to acknowledge the powerless, those with authority evading those seeking truth, a system that is supposed to protect the vulnerable instead protecting those who victimize them. That image should haunt us. It should make us angry, and it should motivate us to demand better, to insist on real accountability, to refuse to accept a justice system that serves only the privileged few. Because if we accept this, if we shrug and move on, if we allow the Department of Justice to surveil Congress, to obstruct oversight, to protect perpetrators while exposing victims, then we are complicit too. We become part of the system that enables these crimes, that allows them to continue, that sends the message to future Epsteins that they can operate with impunity as long as they cultivate the right connections and maintain leverage over the right people. The fight for justice in the Epstein case is far from over. In fact, it may just be beginning. And it is a fight that will determine not just whether survivors get the accountability they deserve, but whether American democracy can still function as intended, with meaningful checks on power and consequences for those who abuse it. The answer to that question has implications far beyond any single scandal. It will define what kind of country we are and what kind of future we are building. That is why this matters. That is why we cannot look away.